Hey everyone. So I have kind of four pieces to this. I've broken this up into like finding journalists based on the industry and site first, which I don't necessarily love. I like the finding journalists based on their content. I think it gives you a foot in the door. And then part two, and then part three is going to be evaluating the journalists and the things that I think are important to look for beyond just, their name and their bio or something. And last is the Q&A. I got a ton of awesome questions, so we'll go through some of that stuff and hopefully questions will pop up. All right. So just kind of quickly on like why this stuff is important. I feel like most of you listening probably know this, but there's some important changes happening, and I think it is getting more and more challenging to find relevant journalists. We saw this in our State of Digital PR last year. I'm assuming we're running this right now again. I'm assuming this is going to get even worse. For those of you who saw my last webinar, covered a little bit more of this and why, but it's essentially that there's, layoffs happening. More people are getting into digital PR. So there's just kind of like a shrinking audience and a lot more crap going out to these journalists. And you can see this in the data. Muckrack did a great study, which I'm, again, like they're going to redo this in 2026. I would assume this is going to get worse, but over half the journalists seldom or never get relevant pitches. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is not just finding pitches or finding relevant journalists, because they clearly are overwhelmed. And again, this was what my previous webinar was all about, but we have found that the smaller, more targeted media lists, the targeted, like relevant ones, are the ones that get you better open rates, better reply rates, and most importantly, what everybody cares about is the links and coverage. So part one, just some kind of tactics for thinking about finding relevant journalists, starting in the site level. These are things that we used to run these through anyone joining a digital PR team. If you're trying to kind of come up with seed sites potentially, good old Google search for the industry, something like tech sites it's getting easier and easier, I feel like, to find this kind of stuff because Google has these modules within the searches, but also I think it's important to always start very specifically and then get broad. So, if you're looking for a piece about Apple computer trends, like say that's, what your story is about, or maybe you're doing some expert commentary, you want to start as specific as possible before you start to open up the range here. Then you got your similar headlines. Now, I think this is a good kind of inroad way to find the types of sites that you're going to find specific journalists. So, and the reason I don't love this is because you're kind of having to do two searches. Like if, say you created a marketing report, you do a search like marketing report, you're going to find sites that tend to cover this type of stuff, but then you have to go and evaluate the site one more time and make sure that you're going to find the right journalist at the publication. You're going to evaluate the site, which is some of the stuff I'll get into next. This is actually what I found was one of the easier ways to do this. Listicles and blogs, like people love this, especially nowadays. And kind of a fun tip, another thing I realized when I was doing this is a great way to build relationships with potential other sites and, not necessarily journalists, but people who maybe own sites in your industry, own news sites, is actually building your own top sites within a specific industry. So for instance, we had a client back in the day. It was like a construction rental company. And one of the first pieces of content we did was like the top construction blogs. And we did this with HR as well. That's probably a better example, HR blogs. And it was an HR company that was our client. So we did a piece on HR blogs because it had search volume. But what this also allowed me to do was build relationships with the people who own those blogs, because once I published the post, I reached out to them all and said, hey, just wanted to let you know I featured you on this site. And people are genuinely, as long as you are genuine about it and you say nice things about it, it's a good kind of inroads. That kind of can lower the friction and lower the barrier to entry for some people. AI is getting really great with this. I think this is probably one of the better use cases for this type of thing. So I found it's best to give them a specific type of site. So if you want to go with PC World, for instance, that's the journalist, or sorry, that's the website, the publication type that you're maybe searching for. Ask them for relevant related sites. There used to be a search operator called Related that I am pretty sure Google has discontinued, but this essentially will do the same thing. There is a Chrome extension called Similar Sites that I know a lot of people in the digital PR space like as well. Does the same thing. If you find a website, pop this open, and it's run by SimilarWeb, so it'll find you similar sites. I found that it's not 100%. I actually found AI to be a little better with this, but it's still worth checking out for sure. The other thing is, found you going out of this route, you can kind of sometimes hit walls quickly, especially in like a weird industry. So make sure you're thinking about your story or your pitch from all the different angles, because that can open up different search avenues. So for instance, here's a site, the most popular breakup food in every US state. So like you can do the typical, city, state news, but you can also kind of lean into the different areas that this site is going to be pitchable. So dating, lifestyle, obviously. So it's breakup food, right? So there's dating, lifestyle types of sites. And then there's food sites that may be open to this stuff. So that's one way, this is the kind of thing you should be thinking about, I think, at the onset of a campaign. And I had this big section in here, and I figured I'd just kind of talk about this rather than like backtrack fully. But I think when you're going to build a campaign, I think you should always be thinking about this stuff from the start. It's way easier to do it this way. I know that's not always going to be the case, but I'd highly recommend, like, if you are starting some type of campaign, always have, your primary outreach industry, and then whatever other angles, try to touch a few other ones. The most successful people, the people that get the most coverage and links out of their posts, have these different angles. Are they going to be super, super relevant to your company or your site? Probably not all the time, but this gets into, the two maybe big reasons that we do digital PR is like, one is to serve as just a way to build domain authority, and the other is to really serve the bottom line and get people visiting your site who might be customers. These things are kind of blurring a bit, and there's definitely a way to do this where you're reaching different angles and different industries that are complementary to your own. You don't want to go too far outside of the realm, but just kind of throwing that out there. Okay. So once you find the site, what's next? As I mentioned earlier, I don't love this approach because then you kind of have to do two steps. I would much prefer doing it this way, but you can do it both ways. And this kind of leads into finding relevant journalists at these sites. So if you found a site, you can do Google searches. So I kind of mentioned this, but searching for like the type of content, but I'd rather get very specific. So if you use Google search to find journalists that are covering the same types of articles that you're pitching, or same types of campaigns, search for very similar titles. So like if I was doing a city study around, or city index study that found Austin was the best city, I would do a specific search for Austin named best city. You want to search for those similar titles. Make sure you set date parameters on all of your searches. Excuse me. In the same way that I mentioned, like using your industry and starting very specific and opening up, I would start at the past month. Some people like to start at past week. It kind of depends on the campaign you're doing. I mean, you're probably not going to find many in the past week unless you're doing some like newsjacking and you want to do some extra commentary for some trending news story. But always start small and then expand. I think that's a great way to build any list and kind of think about that for all the stuff that you're doing. Okay. In Google News, similarly, if you want to find campaigns, find journalists who are writing similar pieces to what you are pitching, use the all in title. It's not in title. It's kind of weird. Like when you're using Google search, you use in title. When you're using Google News, you have to use all in title to find the words that you want. So you see Austin best city here, and you can see on all these cases, we got Austin best city for US, best food we ate, Austin simulates. So these are going to identify the ones that you want. Okay, I am going to share this after the fact, this deck with you all, but these are kind of my search queries, search operators for finding a couple different kind of common types of studies or campaigns that digital PRs usually do. I feel like the city index search is one of the one of the more prevalent campaign types that people do. So any of these things, you find your city, or if you're new in a state, you do it the same way. So here I have Illinois ranked U.S. cities. That's going to find you. This is a Google search. This is going to find you those specific ones that have the same kind of writing, because this is how journalists like to write their headlines for these data pieces. It's kind of a lot more to this. I tried to encapsulate as many angles of this as I can. Data reveals is a huge one. Survey reveals, the word reveals, but study finds, report finds, all this stuff. So again, I'm going to share this stuff at the end, but I would kind of go through, if you're kind of thinking about a way to do it, you just kind of run through all of these, and you can even build tools, I think, using ChatGPT that will spit out all of these, and you can kind of go through Google News search or Google search and identify people that way. Expert commentary. This is an interesting one because a lot of people say the expert says or expert finds, which I don't have here. That's the best way to find journalists who cover expert commentary. I don't necessarily think that's always the case. Yes, this will find you headlines where it says expert says in there. My favorite is actually, you got to look at the in-text words. And even in this case, like, it doesn't always find it. But what you're doing here at the very bottom, my favorites here, all in text, search operator, and then the words expert said, and then your topic. So here was one I did on, it was taxes, expert said, or maybe it was like war or something. And the other one that I like is, if you know the type of expert that you're looking for, add that in there. So like, if say you're reaching out on behalf of a nutritionist or something, you would say nutritionist said, put that in quotes, and that's going to find you articles that have nutritionist said or nutrition expert said, and then you put the topic. That'll narrow it down to places where there are news searches, where people there are news publications and stories where people are using that type of terminology within the pieces. Excuse me. And then I just wanted to kind of call out that this is one thing that journalists are not good at. Sorry, AI is not good at all. For instance, I was trying to kind of emulate this, where it was like, find me journalists in Illinois who would be interested in a post about the most, I forget what it was, like the eco-conscious cities in Illinois. And here, or sorry, no, it was food related. The most, the best restaurants or something. Most popular breakup food in every state. There, Vince, I did this for a reason. The most popular breakup food in every state. So I just want to kind of show, it gave me these 5 journalists. The first one it gave me was this Steve Dolinsky guy. He is a reporter, but he has a food guy segment. This is not necessarily what you're looking for if you're pitching like a best cities type of index study. He is not going to be your guy to cover this. Dawn said that the AI, ChatGPT, said that she was a food journalist. When you look at her bio, she's a travel writer. Here's Serena Maria Daniels. She lives in Detroit, Michigan, which is not Illinois at all. So I'm showing you this for 2 reasons, because just to show you that AI is not great at this. But the secondary reason is, these are the kinds of things that you have to look for when you are evaluating a journalist. So let's get into the second version of this, where it's, once you have your site, then you're going to try to find a relevant journalist at that site. And then I'm going to talk about evaluating the journalist specifically. So if you know your site, say you're looking at Fortune, try to find an About Us page, staff page, meet the team. Usually you'll find that a lot on like local news in the US. You might have to use a site search to find this, but here's an example. This is Fortune's page. So like, if you're looking for specific writers, like here would be writers, then you'd have to dig into this a little more. This isn't as specific. You'll find other staff pages that have, clearer roles. Someone will say, the food reporter, or the, breaking news reporter, or the weekend reporter. The go-to, I think, for this would be using a site search. So if you know it's fortune.com and you know you need to find a finance reporter, you go site:fortune.com and then the word finance reporter. And that's going to find you people like Eleanor Pringle, Louisa Beltran, and then you're going to dig in to make sure that they are who they say they are. You can get very specific once you find the journalist specifically. So like, for instance, if I'm looking for a finance reporter, here's Eleanor Pringle, is the first person on my list. Then I can say, okay, now I want to find articles that Eleanor wrote about mortgages. So I do by Eleanor Pringle mortgages. So focus on those keywords, and that's going to highlight those specific people. I found it's probably easier to do it where you're doing a site search for the specific type of article. So if I had an article that I was trying to pitch or a story around mortgage prices, I'm doing a site search on my target site with the keyword mortgage prices. I recommend this, if you really want to cut down some time, it's just a little Chrome extension. It's super helpful. It does the same exact thing. It just does site : but it saves you a click. I always use this. Highly recommended. Janky little plugin, but it always works. I shouldn't say janky. It's well done. There's no frills. So yeah, definitely check that out. And I'm saying all this because I find the publisher's site search bar is not always the best way to find articles. Some of them work well. Some of them don't have the best logic. And they're like these weird plugins that they use, and they'll surface articles from 2011, even though you have it set to newest article. So yeah, I would err on the side of using Google search for this kind of stuff. Okay. Should I stop here, take questions? But let's see what time it is. Let's get through. We'll save the questions to the end. Kind of on a roll here, because I think this is probably the most important piece of this is once you find a journalist, what's next? Evaluating journalists for fit. I do want to say one thing. I realized the thing I have not mentioned at all is using media lists. I should have probably used this. It said this in the very beginning. Media databases. Historically, never used a media database. I always found them to be a bit bloated. You can get lost spending a lot of time in those. You have to end up doing a lot more qualifying of the journalists and digging. And I find it's just way easier to look at the site you're looking for and find journalists this way. I do have some posts about this on the BuzzStream blog and how to use media databases, but I definitely find the journalists manually versus media database. But I'll get to, I know a couple of people have a couple of questions about doing these types of searches internationally. Okay. So if you're looking at evaluating a journalist for fit, you can usually find everything you need on the bio or the recent articles. So let's go through some of these. So say you've found a journalist. You've identified maybe an article they've written that is relevant to what you're doing. You always still want to make sure you're validating the journalist and making sure they are a good fit. So first thing you want to do is make sure they're still active. And you do this by looking at the published dates. If it's more than 30 days and they haven't published anything, they most likely are not active. There are extenuating circumstances. Maybe somebody's out sick. Maybe they're on maternity leave, paternity leave. They might be on holiday. The other thing that you may see is that this may indicate that they are a freelancer. So you might see one article per month or something, and maybe they're just a contributing author. But you want to pay attention to this because this will kind of help dictate how you're going to do your outreach. Then you want to dig into their bio. Again, this is a great example here because we have Fortune does a good job of showing everything that we need, but you want to look for your keywords in the bio to make sure it matches the industry that you're targeting. So in this case, say we wanted to pitch mortgages pricing or something, a study or report. I see that this person is a personal finance reporter, editor who covers mortgages. Okay. Now, this is probably the most important thing you're going to take away from this whole webinar is the format of the article. So yes, you might find what seems like the perfect fit in terms of this person covers tech. They write for PC World. They cover the specific type of tech that you're writing about. But if they're not writing in the same format that you are pitching, you're not going to connect with them. And this is one of the most common mistakes that everybody makes. So journalists will write in all kinds of different things, right? They will write listicles. A lot of them, as the newsrooms have been shrinking, a lot of them are put in charge of writing more SEO friendly articles and not necessarily news articles, right? Data studies. Some of them write data studies. Some of them write data studies, but they're only done by the data studies are internal data studies. I know, for instance, The Economist recently realized they've been running a lot of data, but they partner with OnePoll and they're sharing a lot of their own data studies, not external studies. A lot of journalists do exclusives, only do exclusives. I my previous webinar, I talked about Rosie Taylor, who she was a journalist in the UK. She covered health, women's health and family health. And she was showing me her inbox, and there was a ton of stuff about health, but realistically, there was nobody pitching to her exclusively. But when you looked into her website and the types of content that she wrote about, you could see little lines in there that would say like, exclusive source, exclusive data, or exclusive, we are able to reveal this exclusive data. So little clues as to the types of things they write. So I'm not going to belabor this point, but I'm going to give you some examples. The easiest way to do this is look for the article types that match what you're pitching. This person, for instance, this guy that we've been looking at, Glenn Luke Flanagan on Fortune, although he covers mortgage rates, there's a very specific type of article or post or whatever story, whatever you want to call it, that this person writes about. These daily reports and monthly reports. He is not a breaking news reporter. You're not going to be pitching him your mortgage trends piece and expect him to write about it, because that's not what he does. And actually, when I dug into Glenn Luke Flanagan's LinkedIn to just kind of wrap my head around this a bit more, see that he used to be a deputy editor. Now he's the evergreen content editor, which is another, flag that, hey, this guy's probably writing like SEO type articles. You can see it here, build a content calendar. So we're covering target verticals, blah, blah, blah. But this just tells me I'm not pitching this guy my story, because that's not what he's going to be doing. Here's Lori Roberts. It says that she's a columnist here. And again, like sometimes these are the types of details that we glaze over, and sometimes a media database isn't going to find these things. But if you're not digging into their recent articles, you're not going to see that this person writes an op-ed, right? She's a columnist. Typically it's like op-ed type of journalist, or like has a very specific column that they write where it's like, Lori's finds or something. But this person does these op-eds for these different types of topics. So they're not the type of person that I would pitch my story to. Look for signs of affiliate posts. That's like a easy sign that this is probably not the journalist that you want to write to. And I want to caveat this because I think Will Waldron, we had on our podcast, did a great presentation in Brighton last year, I think. And I could share the episode with you guys. But if you want to completely ignore journalists who have affiliate commissions, I think it's going to make it a lot harder. I think more and more publications are doing this sort of thing. I would probably avoid them, because the types of articles they're sharing are usually not going to be what we want. But there's this, he did this whole presentation on like what to do when your journalist adds a tracking link, which is something that Google doesn't like, or like an affiliate link back to your site. And so I lean on the side of like, if it's a journalist who writes affiliate posts, who has affiliate links in there, I would skip it. These are probably not the kind of links that are going to be valuable from a search perspective anyway. But that said, like if you're doing like a product launch or something and you want to get your product out there, by all means, do it. So like there's definitely like two ways to look at this. If it's like a data study or something, probably wouldn't pitch this person who's writing like listicles on the best shoes to wear. But like if you have a shoe company, yeah, sure, go for it. Okay. Has the author published something relevant consistently? This is also key. You want to look at recent post titles. There's a lot of, especially these days, you'll see journalists are jumping around a lot more. So you might find one recent article that a person wrote that is relevant to you, but then you dig into their backlog of recent posts and you're realizing like, hey, this person's not writing about this stuff at all. So usually that's just like a one-off. So this person clearly, when I'm looking at it, has covered Latin American news, particularly Venezuela stuff recently. And it says he's a Latin American correspondent. So like this is kind of qualifying this for me. This person has published the stuff recently, consistently. Another check is your story new to the author? So here's an example, getting back to that, like, is Austin the best place to move? Maybe we had a post about that. Austin was found the best place to move in the city. Here's someone who's written about this, but like it's December 6th, and we're December 16th right now. They have just written about this. So the chances that they're going to be open to sharing two studies back to back within 10 days one another is very slim. So I would avoid these people. Make sure your story is news to the author, right? Okay. Is the author in-house or freelance? Usually it says it in the bio. You can usually check in LinkedIn to see where they are as well. Look for, if they're present at this specific publication. The author being in-house or freelance can sometimes change the way that you reach out and can change the outcomes, which I'll get to in the Q&A section. Does the author link to brands? This is a very important one too. In some of these cases, you're going to find that like the news site itself doesn't link out to brands. And usually the easiest way to do it is just kind of like checking in the links themselves, like hover over them and you can see them at the bottom left. It'll say, like for instance, the conversation is one that popped up. If I was going to try to pitch someone from here, I was going to try to pitch someone from the conversation. They only link out to .govs, .orgs, academic research, not brands. So that's kind of a key thing, I think, too, a differentiator in the type of site. But there might be journalists that only specifically like to send out to or link out to certain brands and that sort of thing versus academic research. Okay, because the last one is the external events in the area. This is another big one. Weather events and tragedies, as you know, can disrupt communities, specifically like if you're doing local news. There's two kind of pieces to this. Journalists will sometimes jump into specific areas when time is, if needed. So like if there's a weather event, for instance, like the traffic reporter will now cover the road conditions, but also the sports writers or the writers who write about tech normally, like they're going to jump on because it's kind of an all hands on deck type of situation in a lot of these cases. Case in point, this is something happening in kind of the Pacific Northwest in the States. So it was Skagit River was flooding. And so like you could see every journalist was kind of all hands on deck. So that's an important thing, I think, for two reasons. Like this might change the way their recent articles look. So if you're evaluating a journalist, sometimes you might need to go to the homepage and take a bigger step back and be like, okay, what's actually happening? Is this news for them right now? Should I even be pitching this? But then, yeah, like also, I think there's like the personal side of things. It's like, do you want to pitch them hey, Austin was just named the best place to get food? If there was like some terrible tragedy happening, like journalists probably don't want that story right now. And sometimes, I've gotten in trouble, not in trouble, but like I've definitely come up to news stories where I'm like, this is too light for what's happening right now, or this is too heavy for, maybe they just had a bunch of things going on and this is some negative piece of news that people don't want. So be aware of that. I think that's an important piece of this. Okay, before I get to Q&A, I want to do frequently asked questions that people have. Pitching editors versus journalists. I would always aim for the journalist. I think the only times that I would go for an editor is if you really know the editor. But, there's potential that like if the main journalist is out of office, they will say, reach out to my editor because I'm out of office, or like off hours or weekend editors too. Like can sometimes help if you're pitching on the weekends. Okay. Freelancers versus in-house journalists. We've got, on the one hand, I think in-house, I always prefer in-house, but there's the kind of pros and cons. Like the in-house journalist is always more likely to get you in that publication. But that said, the flip side is like they're going to be a lot busier. So it can be harder and you might want to approach it differently. You really want to give them every single thing they need to write the article in your pitch. You want to give them their quotes. And like, this is stuff that maybe you want to do all the time, but like, especially for in-house journalists because they are so time poor. Whereas with freelancers, they are going to take your pitch and then repackage it and pitch it to their editors that they work with. So it opens up the door for potentially more potential coverage, or it widens the net on the different publications you get from. But they also, and this was something that Rosie Taylor actually in our podcast mentioned to me, it's like they have a vested interest in getting your story picked up by a site. So like they can do kind of more heavy lifting for you. That's not to say like you shouldn't give them everything that they need to cover the story, but like, I just think there's pros and cons to each. If you have a great relationship with a freelancer, that's awesome. And like, I recommend everyone on this call, every digital PR has kind of like their go-to freelancers because that can increase the net of types of coverage that you're going to get. One note is when we did this study, freelancers do tend to reply more, but they also tend to open a lot less. So just keep that in mind, like, and it kind of speaks to this, like they are, again, they have this vested interest. So if they are interested, they're going to reply and probably follow up and ask for more details and that sort of thing. So they can mold their pitch to their editors how they want. Before I open the Q&A, I guess it's important for me to re-mention for those of you who might not know this, but like ListIQ, we built ListIQ to do a lot of this stuff for you to make this whole process easier, because obviously like all that stuff I just listed out takes a long time if you're manually searching through all of these. So like say I was doing a post about flight cancellations. So I was newsjacking or I had a study or something. I could do a Google search, Google News search like this. And instead of having to click in individually into all these articles and digging into the journalists and learning all the stuff I need to learn and evaluate the journalists, I can ask ListIQ, okay, I want you to come over here. I'm going to add all these people on my list to evaluate them. And then I want to bring the search summary. Tell me if they're still active at the publication. Tell me their job title, what's their bio, obviously their email address, recent articles. And then it's going to go and do that in a few seconds. And then you get all of this information that's going to help you speed up this process. Article authors, you can get their email addresses, verified email addresses, but specifically, like importantly, activity checks. Are they still active at the publication? Have they written within the past 30 days? What's their bio? You can kind of pick out, oh, this person, Alex, covers breaking news. This person, Josh Funk, he's the transportation guy. Leslie Josephs also does travel issues. Marco Hernandez, visually driven stories. So if you have some visuals or something, and then you got all the recent articles. So then you can go through and say, oh, are they writing the same types of things? Like, are they, does this look like it's an op-ed? Does it look like it's a very specific, like, do they only write listicles, or are they covering news, breaking news? So all this stuff at a glance, it speeds up this process in an immense way. I say typically to do all those steps I was talking about before, looking at, if they're still active and checking if they're a relevant fit and what types of posts they're writing. It's about 10 minutes per journalist, whereas this can get it down to a minute, sometimes a few seconds, having this all at a glance. And like the last webinar, anyone who is here and is interested in this will get you access and some extra credits to try it out on your campaigns. So I'll follow up with that. Our next webinar, January 15th. So pretty much a month from now, we're going to talk about the perfect pitch, evaluating, pitches from BuzzStream users that have kind of shared some of their tips and templates on what really works well, and I'm going to share some secrets. It should be really cool. Okay, let's open the questions. Feel free to drop them in the chat. So one of the questions from Kareem was, do you have specific journalist requests that you follow other than obvious ones? Journalist requests, that was something I didn't even cover on here. I feel like it deserves its own webinar. Maybe I will do that. But I recommend, if you're doing journalist requests, that's definitely one way to get into it. That's definitely an easy way to find journalists, because you're catching them where they need you rather than just like pitching out of the blue. Haro, source of sources, quoted. There's a tool called, oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on it. I did a whole study with them, and I'm just going to open it up here so I don't mess this up. Let me see here. We'll share this tab so I can show you me forgetting this. So I have this whole study on where the different Press Pulse combines a lot of these journalist requests, extra commentary requests. Highly recommend checking it out. But we did this whole study on them, and they pull in quoted, featured, help a reporter out, source of sources, help a B2B writer. Substack requests sometimes come through there. Twitter, probably the most obvious place, but also LinkedIn. And then we were able to kind of map out where they came from. Most of them are coming from quoted. We mapped out the types, the overlap, but also the industries, the domain authority. So I'll share this with you all later, but this is probably the best answer I can give you on this stuff, because there's a bunch, but Press Pulse pulls them all together. I recommend checking that out. Okay. Another question we had was about data and the German market and finding journalists in the German market. And in general, I had another question about just like internationally finding people. And I don't have a lot of great data. It's kind of hard to geotag a lot of our pitches. I can kind of find our data based off of the people using BuzzStream in those areas. I have some studies here on like how long it takes to get replies in different areas, because I know that was another question. But to find journalists in other areas, I would say one of the podcasts we had on someone who, she's Ellie Morgan from Australia, digital PR from Australia. And she had said specifically, like, finding journalists in Australia, and that was the specific questions here. Finding journalists in Australia is a little different because she said it's almost kind of like behind the times, behind the UK. This digital PR person came from the UK and started in Australia. And she said there's a lot more like taking the journalists out to coffee and meeting them in one-to-one time. So there's definitely going to be a lot of nuance, I think, depending on where you're reaching out to people and where you're trying to find journalists. But there are also dedicated media databases for some of these other areas. I would still go with Google searches as much as you can because of those limitations I mentioned about media databases. But like, for instance, telemedia is specifically for like Australia and that region of the world. You know, obviously Rocks Hill for UK people like that. It's for there. Like Cision, I've heard is pretty good in terms of like international, but I think still Muckrack is probably the best coverage worldwide, regardless if you're going to go the media database route. But like I said, I think Google searching is still going to be the best route there. Okay. Another question was about, Karen had a great question about finding podcasters. Is this the same process? And I think for the most part, it is. Like, I think there are a couple tools for finding podcasters out there. Say it, Pod Searcher. There's looking at Podchaser. There's a bunch of these, but like I would still go through and say, you know, okay, what is the thoughtful entrepreneur, for instance? They've written about, they got PR person in here, but like, do they cover that all the time? Instead of looking at the bio, you're looking at the description for the podcast. Instead of looking at the recent articles, you're looking at recent episodes. You don't want to pitch yourself if they've already covered the same exact topic that you're pitching. So it's definitely the same thing. I have a whole post on this as well, Karen, I can share, but like the mindset is the same. You want to make sure it's the best relevant fit for what you're doing. I think I covered everything. If you found the list, how often should you update it? That's a great question. Thanks, Colin. You know, with so much turnover these days, from everybody I talk to, people still do it. Like, I'd say a majority of the agencies that work with BuzzStream do it about every month. I mean, that was one of the main reasons we built ListIQ, because you can actually pull in your media list into ListIQ and run that same activity check for your media list. 1 second. And that'll show you if they're still active. So like, that's the easiest way to do it. And it takes, you know, seconds rather than hours sometimes to make sure they're still relevant and active for your publication. So yeah, I would say, I mean, these days, probably once a month, but probably depends on the industry. I know somebody told me they've noticed like the finance industry has had a lot of turnover. So there's no like great one answer, I think, but based off of who I talked to, I'd say it's still every month. Okay. Let me see if we got any other questions from the chat. Oh, speed up the processes. Maria, you had asked this. Obviously, yeah. I mean, hopefully I answered that. ListIQ is the way to speed that up just because it does take forever. But keep in mind that like, I think the reason that study I shared where it was like the smaller, more relevant targeted data media lists tend to do well overall. They are smaller because they are more relevant, because it takes more time to do it. So it's not like you can just take a media list and cut it in half and you're going to get better results. Like the reason they're small is because it is time consuming. And I think there's this mindset that like you have to reach out to 100 people for every post, every story, but quality always is going to trump quantity in these cases. Getting 1 or 2 pieces of coverage, I think, is normal these days and should be kind of more where we're going. And from when, you know, I talk to digital PR folks and agencies, like that is definitely the case. The same processes they used to take, the same kinds of stories last year used to get like 100 links are getting like 10 links. So if you're feeling the burn, it's like that is definitely not just you. Everybody's feeling it this way. So I would err on the side of spending more time, care, building these relevant media lists. Raul says, where can we access recorded videos? I have them on the blog on buzzstream.com/blog. There should be like a webinars section. There was only one other one that we did so far, and this other one will will also be on the blog. Sign up for our newsletter. You'll also see them there. I post them on LinkedIn. Follow me on there. I was hoping to have time to like build a media list for people, but I realized ran out of time. But if that's something that would be interesting for people to see, let me know. Like I'm happy to reprise this. And if people send me their campaigns, we can kind of do it. Or you want me to evaluate your media list, I can go through and say like, I wouldn't reach out to this guy, this is why. But yeah, my door is always open for that sort of thing. My email is just Vince@BuzzStream. If you have questions about that kind of stuff, shoot them over. I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. Again, reminder, there's going to be another webinar in a month. I hope you all have a great holiday season.